just about everybody that's into astronomy has this sort of wonderment about the universe, its vastness, its mystery, all that we know and so much more that we don't know.
Everyone is fascinated with the cosmos. There are so many unknowns. We're really just bumbling in the dark.
Our keynote speaker for the evening is Dr. Larry Molnar, The Lives and Dramatic Deaths of Contact Binary Stars. Dr. Larry Molnar.
Thank you for having me here. I always enjoy telling stories about the stars. Tonight and tomorrow, you're going to hear a new story. This hasn't been told on the lecture circuit all around. You're hearing it for the first time. I did not really know when I began where I was going to end up. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. I didn't always know what was going to happen next. And it's actually a story where there's still a few pages left to write. And particularly the topic for tonight is the search for the next star that's going to explode.
Well, we're on the top of the science building right now on Calvin's campus, waiting to see a total lunar eclipse at the point of perigee. So that means that the media would call it a blood moon supermoon.
Yeah, and a lot of people were upstairs just looking at the mirror and hear about what the observatory does. And it's better PR if the clouds are clear, but I think people know we're here. They might well come back, and that's exciting to me.
Astronomy is one of the oldest sciences, in part because everyone can participate. If you're a sheep herder 5,000 years ago, if you sit out at night, you can observe that the planets move over the course of the year. And that next year at about the same time, the constellations will be in the same place. So there's an important sense in which these are the earliest patterns that humans can see.
Even in ancient times, Aristotle understood that the Earth was a sphere, and his proof for that...
Larry is a passionate astronomer. He loves astronomy, and his default assumption is that everyone should love astronomy.
The right size to exactly block the sun. Sorry about the clouds. Everybody gets a free voucher to come and visit the observatory on another night. We are open Monday night through Thursday night, when it's clear. We have so many good things you can see with this telescope. Just come back another night.
Larry's a very social guy. When Larry joined the physics department at Calvin, he noticed that there weren't standing social events. And he felt like it would be a really great idea to get students together so that they could get a chance to get to know each other.
That's bad.
Now let him send it flying about 30 feet through the air.
Larry loves astronomy, and as a scientist is perhaps one of the most careful people I know. But that's so perfectly balanced with somebody who cares deeply about a community around him, who's very involved in church life. He's an example to many of us on that front as well.
I did my graduate study at Harvard University, master's and doctoral degrees.
Larry was, I thought, unbelievably smart, meticulous, and already an excellent scientist when he came here. And it's sort of something I think you almost can't teach somebody, is how to be a really good scientist.
Of those students that graduated about the same time I did, one is a senior official at NASA, one was the president of Sky and Telescope magazine. Others are faculty members at Yale and other institutions like that. I don't know of any who are currently teaching at a small liberal arts college. Is this a linear? Is this who knows? And this time, today's date there.
So the star that led to this prediction was actually first investigated by an undergraduate student. I've heard of graduate students or postdocs being the ones to make a discovery, but it's exceedingly rare that it's the undergraduate who's looking at the raw data and who is the one who makes the discovery, so that's really cool.
Daniel Venord. I was the original discoverer of the period change in KIC 9832227, and the student researcher who did most of the preliminary analysis on the system. I will say, I didn't actually discover the star itself.
This star was originally identified as a variable star in a survey that I used for my PhD thesis at Michigan State. I was presenting a short talk on this particular star, and it was very fortuitous because at the time I was looking for experts in the field who could help me interpret what was going on with this very strange star.
So I volunteered and said, I can figure that out.
His interest and his alertness has actually started down a path which now has gone way beyond what he imagined at that moment. Right? Other people could, in principle, recognize this is an interesting star, but they didn't.
We have this image of science that you see in the movies and in television and books, and it's sort of a eureka moment, right? You have the badly dressed scientist sitting in a dark room working on something by themselves, and then they make a discovery, and then they run out of the room and they say, I have discovered this thing, and then everyone now knows that to be true, and they believe it. None of those aspects is correct. Very rare for a scientist to work by themselves. It's almost always in a group. When it comes to the moment of discovery, there's never a moment of discovery, but one person says, hey, I just saw something funny, can you come take a look at this?
This is a star that was changing its light, getting brighter and dimmer, brighter and dimmer. Every 11 hours, it would go brighter and dimmer twice. And the question is that because the star is really getting brighter and dimmer? That is, say it's a pulsing, something inherent to the star? Or is it an artifact of how we look at the star? Binary stars, as they orbit around each other, one star eclipses the other, and so it will look fainter for us, just as we see it at different phases of the orbit. What we were able to show is that indeed it is a binary star, but as we put all the data together, we came to a very striking pattern.
They presented this initial result where they had looked at the star, they had figured out that it was a binary star, and they had realized, we think it's starting to spin faster and faster.
What does that mean? It means the stars actually have to be getting closer. Well, these stars are already so close they're nearly touching. How much closer can you get? They have to be pushed into each other. They have to begin to merge. That event can release as much energy as the sun would release in its entire lifetime.
That's when it was hitting me, wow, this is just a few years away. Nobody's ever seen anything of this kind. I raised my hand and pointed out to the students that this is important, people.
What we're talking about is a prediction that a pair of stars are going to collide and essentially blow up. Nobody has ever been able to do that before.
A lot of people know that things will blow up eventually, and they publish articles about it all the time. But my prediction is that this thing is going to become a red nova in 3 to 5 years from right now.
That's an incredible needle in the haystack. It's sort of like 1 in 10 million stars would go through this in a human lifetime.
It only happens when you're not looking. It only happens if you had a lifetime of 1,000,000 years that you'd be there to see it.
The odds of it are very small. The odds that someone would be looking at the right stars at the right time.
Will there be predicted, now for the first time in history, the appearance of a new star? That's what Larry Molnar is looking for.
Generations of students have really liked Casey because he's just so friendly. He's almost 16. Oh my. You know, we run the telescope robotically overnight, and sometimes he'll wake up in the middle of the night, and then, because he woke me up, I'll catch that the dome had gotten stuck or something. So I give him credit for catching a few astronomical problems in the bud. Girl, there you are. Yes, she likes to go for a walk. Hello. There's a good girl, yeah. There's a good girl. Got my tail up because this is my street.
Merging stars are thought to happen about once every 10 years in our galaxy.
Oh, right.
So there must be one that's out there that's only a few years away from blowing up. It's a question of which one.
In a sense, I guess the thought occurred to us 2 years ago that it was a possibility, but we didn't think of it seriously. In that first year, what we saw is it continued to get faster, and it's been keeping right on it. And that's where sort of the tension mounts, if you will. I still have to say, with one part of me, it just seems unlikely that it's going to explode, because statistics are, how do you know it's going to be this star? There's so many other stars it could be. But if it's not going to, it's teasing me. If it's not going to, why is it continuing to do exactly what I've predicted that it's going to do? And having realized that even if it isn't this one that goes off, that there is a star out there somewhere, the thought is we should look for it.
The idea of novae, the idea of stars that just blow up, get so much brighter, 10,000 times brighter than they were before, such that you see a star where you didn't see one before. That has historical significance for the very foundation of science and astronomy.
Before the Renaissance, the European understanding of the cosmos was that, by definition, it did not change.
Aristotle's science was the heavens are immutable. They go around and round in cycles, but never anything new, never anything missing.
That worldview dominated for millennia.
And then one day, this Danish astronomer, Tycho Brahe, walks outside, and as he tells the story, he looked up in the sky, and he knew the night sky so well that he could see that there was a new star in the sky.
A nova, as it was called in Latin, new star. It was so bright that it could be seen at dusk when other stars were just beginning to come out.
And that might not shock you, unless you had been deeply trained in this tradition that, by definition, the sky can never change.
It indicated that the truths that had been handed down for generations were not necessarily final.
It changed what seemed to be unchangeable. It was that one little dot that begins all the questioning about the nature of the cosmos. If a new star can appear, then what else might be true?
Here we are hundreds of years later with the prospect, again, of a naked eye nova.
Stars do not explode every day. One of the things that makes the prediction of a luminous red nova something that excites all of us is that if this thing does pop off, it's going to be easy to see. It's going to be a naked eye object seen against the background of the constellation of Cygnus, the Swan, which is one of the more prominent constellations in the sky. And that will make it quite precedent-setting because we won't have seen anything that bright in the sky appear where no other star was seen before in centuries, basically.
Hey, Dan, welcome back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I find it curious that the main console for the weather station is still blank after your reboot there. Our computer hasn't worked properly over the last year, which has really limited us just when we're trying to do real research. Crashing in the middle of the night, not taking the data we asked it to take. We've brought out a new computer with the hope that all of the power of the telescope will be unleashed again.
What's counterintuitive about the discovery that Molnar has made is you would think that that would come out of a large collaboration where you have many eyes on the sky.
Our telescope setup is small science. It's a 16-inch mirror that the telescope uses to collect the light from the sky. Big science telescopes are at least 10 times that big.
The field of astronomy has been leaping forward. A lot of the observatories now are looking at 8 meter, 10 meter, 12 meter, and in the future, 25 meter, 30 meter, 40 meter telescopes. And these are the size of a small football stadium, basically.
So yeah, on the one hand, it's going to be, who is this guy exactly? How is he coming up with this exciting discovery when we're not? But actually, you might consider it the opposite way. The large telescope, you never have much observing time on any one object. That means there's a whole class of questions they can't answer, questions that involve how things change over time.
There's only a handful of these giant research telescopes. You can't tie them up night after night monitoring a star that may or may not erupt.
How would an astronomer from a bigger institution have done the 18 months of follow-up observations we've done? We've done tens of thousands of images of this star since it first came to our attention.
I don't know if other astronomers would have the freedom of mind even sort of pause and say, what is this thing we've seen in the sky and what might this mean? What might it imply?
At a less distinguished university, sometimes you have more intellectual freedom. The downside, of course, is that you don't have the resources. So in a weird way, modern academia pushes resources towards the people who are doing the most incremental and least groundbreaking work. And the people who are doing the really exciting, risky work are displaced from those resources.
Cleaning the mirror is a very delicate thing. Everything else is a small piece, can be fixed, can be repaired, whatever. But the mirror you gotta have right. We don't have any formal room to do it in, so we just have to do it extremely carefully. Any scratch you have forever. You break the mirror, we have no telescope. Jason asked me if he dropped it, whether he'd have a job in the fall. And,
the answer was no.
the answer was no. Okay. Have to be honest, right? While I'm holding that together, you can take out the last 3 screws. So I'm gonna stand in the middle here and actually just put my head right against that. Oh dear. Could you pull that out of my pocket?
Just like in class. Where is it?
It's my left pocket there.
Hello, Larry Molnar's phone.
I think there's the romance of small science, making an important, in many ways, fundamental scientific discovery and doing it at a small observatory rather than a big one that everyone has heard about, one of those famous ones that even non-scientists know about. Behind the romance of doing small science, however, is simply a lot of hard work and a lot of worry.
Yes. My job is safe for now.
You don't need big telescopes necessarily, but what you need is perseverance. And you also need curiosity, the ability to ask questions without a preconceived notion of what you're going to find. For good science to happen, you have to be open to whatever avenue the investigation is going to take you.
We are here in Chaco Canyon to see something you can't see anywhere else, a pictograph made by people 1,000 years ago of a star that exploded then, the first known exploding star.
The flaring star is actually the representation of the supernova.
Yes. So I think to have the moon and the exploding star done the same way as the hand is just to say they're all done by the same person at the same time.
This also kind of mimics the looking up at the night sky or the daytime sky too. You're looking up.
I think that's a good point, yeah. The thought that the moon and the sun and the star were all visible at the same time seems plausible in interpretation. I have to think, if you saw a star explode, in that case, more impressive than our predictions by far, so bright that you can see it in the middle of the day, that's worth noticing, that's worth handing down, and I think that's what these pictographs are about. It's something worth handing down.
It's fun to think about. 1,000 years ago was when this civilization was thriving. And that's when they saw that supernova that's depicted down below. 1,000 years is the same time it's taken for the light from the star that Larry's discovered to reach us.
We're small people. We can see what's left behind, but can only guess at the culture, the politics, the personal stories of all the people who were here then. In astronomy, by contrast, we see the past. If we see the star blow up, we're going to see what happened 1,000 years ago with our modern cameras. We're directly observing the past. And it goes on as we see distant galaxies. We're seeing not just 1,000 years in the past, but 1,000,000 years and 1,000,000,000 years in the past. Every slice of the history of the universe is actually still observable today in more detail than you can get the history of this canyon. The American Astronomical Society is probably the largest meeting in the world each year of astronomers. It's a tremendously exciting feeling to consider the announcement I'm going to make. At the same time, it's a very nerve-wracking thing because there will be skepticism, and I need to be as prepared as I can be for that. If our star does blow up and you go back and take a picture of it 2 years later, this is what it might look like. There's nobody making predictions of stars that are going to explode. That kind of prediction has never been made before. For a great claim, you gotta have great evidence, and you better have done things really carefully. Last Thursday, though, I came up with another hypothesis. There is another possibility. Merging star isn't the only card on the table. The idea is really relatively simple to describe. Perhaps the timing is all messed up because our pair of stars is in fact orbiting a third star.
So if you have a star orbiting another star with a really big orbit, and they slingshot around each other, that star is getting constantly closer to us.
It could be that this whole last 15 years, the star has been coming in faster and faster as it's coming in towards you. And it might be 20 years before it comes in and then goes out again.
From the very beginning, I have to say, Larry did have the third body model in mind. He didn't forget about it. He actually relied on some collaborators who checked it and then assured him, oh no, it's not a problem. But Larry's a careful guy. And just before he went to the conference in Seattle, he thought to check those numbers, and he realized, uh-oh, they didn't check this one set of parameters that actually could allow this to be a third body.
I don't think I'm disappointed so much as it was exhausting that I needed to think about this. You don't want to go and say something you're going to regret later because there's some silly alternative that you should have been aware of, but you weren't aware of. What's striking, though, is the two different predictions agree completely for the past. Next year, the third body model says it's going to turn around, start going back the other way. The merger blow-up model says, no, it's just going to keep going down and down. So we don't know today what's going to happen, but it means we will know. We will know very soon, next summer, when we have this chance to observe it. Did it go this way or did it go that way?
So now, instead of announcing this exciting finding to the media, Larry's just going to give an update to a bunch of astronomers about his progress on the project.
Unfortunate having asked to have a press conference and having gotten them to agree that this would be exciting, to have to then go back and say, well, I think it's premature.
Science is very rarely 100% certain. The initial results are often tantalizing, but not conclusive.
It is really chasing particular ideas as far as they'll go and having faith in your own intuitions about what are good questions and what are not good questions.
People think of science as this big pile of facts. They are literally given a book and say, this is science. But in fact, science is often grappling with what we don't know about the world.
By definition, you're pushing the limits. You're working at the edge of knowledge. But it's scary out there on the edge.
So in conclusion, somewhere there is a star that right now is within 10 years of merger, and we should find that before it goes off. Thanks for your attention.
In practice, science is an intensely human, very personal, difficult, challenging field.
After Harvard, Larry was invited to go to the University of Iowa and to be a part of the physics department there. And I think that he and Cindy perhaps anticipated this being the place where they would live out their academic lives. He liked it very much. They were well planted in the community. And then a couple years into it, life broke into that department in a way that was really horrible.
I got a phone call from a girlfriend who said, is Larry okay? And I said, well, what do you mean, is Larry okay? And she said, there's been a shooting in his department.
There's been a shooting at the University of Iowa campus in Iowa City.
An unidentified gunman opened fire, killing at least 3 people.
First word is that the gunman was a graduate student upset about the grading of a paper.
Angered at being passed over for an academic award, he killed a rival student who was honored and then shot to death 3 of his professors. The gunman then took his own life.
Gang Lu was an extremely bright guy. He was, as far as I recall, #1 at Beijing University in physics, and as far as I know, had never, ever not scored the highest on any exam he ever took. There is a prize given for the best PhD thesis at the University of Iowa. He did not win that prize.
In the time following the shooting, there's a great emptiness left where the people you've lost are not there anymore.
I just remember him being heartbroken by the whole thing, and that was just a devastating thing for that whole community.
It was a moment that kind of highlights the differences between what one person most values and what another person values. So it was not to him imaginable that he could be second in anything. That was deep in his self-identity. That it really brought to the fore a different perspective on what my self-value was. That my value has been given to me in my faith, so that what's important is that I'm doing work that is in itself meaningful, regardless of an award or recognition, and that I do work with people and I try to make that interaction itself meaningful. Doing the astronomy, loving the astronomy, but not being defined by the astronomy.
When turkey comes out, you want to let it sit to absorb back all that great juice. The way you do it, remember how it works? Work with it with your hands. It's hot.
So it's Thanksgiving. Just drove in from New York to visit my parents for a day or two. I'm a writer, fiction, prose. And I'm definitely not interested in science in the slightest. My dad has that sort of cornered, you know, you come home and see him reading a book that's all equations or something. It's like totally his passion.
So it's always been my job to make the mashed potatoes, because our tradition isn't to have potatoes, but rather to have rice. Just the right consistency, in my view. Not too smooth, but not too lumpy. Adds a variation on the Chinese cuisine here.
It's been accepted for a long time that what are sometimes called non-scientific factors have an important role on the way science develops and changes over time. The work that any individual person does is a confluence of institutional social forces, as well as their own personal biography and beliefs, or maybe even ideology.
Shall I give thanks, Crull? Yes. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day when we all gather together.
When I first met Larry, didn't really know his background. I didn't know, for example, that he was deeply religious. Was it surprising that he was so religious and yet such a good scientist? Yes, at first it was to me. I think basically one can draw a line and say there's certain things that I'll accept without question, and everything else I will question. And obviously that's what Larry does. He's an excellent scientist, so he's able to balance that.
When we do notice that a scientist has some interesting personality feature or an unusual background, we say they're doing science in spite of that. But really, those are the things that make the great scientists. That's what points people at interesting projects and gives them the kind of resources they need to solve those problems.
I think Larry is motivated by a complex sense of calling to be faithful. To be faithful to his God, to his work, to his family, to his community. That's at the core of who he is.
I don't need to do science to have value. I can do science for the joy of it. I can do science because the world's just so interesting. I can do science because God made an amazing universe and I'm revealing some of his glory by seeing what that is.
He is deeply curious. Someone who has that raw, just hunger to understand the cosmos. And I always saw that with Professor Molnar, even in the most stressful situations.
I don't know really whether it will blow up or not. And there's one side of me that really doesn't actually care. What I want to know is the truth. What is this star about?
So we've been waiting since last November to get any new data whatsoever, because the star is too close to the sun. When exactly you kick off the new season depends on the moon and the clouds and your busyness.
Dan Van Noord, my first student on this project, having graduated in December, is now working full-time for Optech Incorporated. And then this summer, I have a new student, Kara, actually specifically transferred to Calvin so that she could work with me.
A lot of profs use research students as sort of grunt work, and they send you to do this or that or fill in numbers without really explaining to you what you're doing. Whereas I found Professor Molnar is very big on explaining the theory of what's going on and why it matters, which is really unique and special.
So what we're looking at right now is my extracting from images of the night sky a real record of brightness versus time. I can click and see what the image looks like there. That's what beautiful data look like. Nice small stars, black sky, easy to measure. Or I can click on one of these noisy things and I see that's a cloud wandering by. And so I'm going to have to edit out the clouds that came by and make use of what remains. I am excited to finally see what is happening now since November. So while I've been calibrating these data from our small telescope, looking to see what the timing has done, we also got approval of observing time in June, which is the height of the season, to get the spectroscopy we need to really test one way or another for the third body.
Apache Point Observatory is at the elevation of 2,700 meters, so it's almost about 9,000 feet. We're in the American Southwest, which is classically known as a very good dark site. The skies are clear for almost 300 nights out of the year.
You always know that if you got 2 good nights on a big telescope, it could be cloudy those nights. You could lose it all for that season and have to wait another year. So that's where, to hedge our bets, we're going to schedule similar things at the spectroscope in Wyoming as well.
So it's kind of exciting to be sent on my own here, a little nerve-wracking.
We bring in 500 or 600 graduates from all over the country every summer, and we're delighted to have Kara from Calvin College as part of this collection of summer students. It's one of life's pleasant ironies that we're able to host a student of my former advisor. A large part of where I am in my career is thanks to the experience I was able to have with Dr. Molnar and have him teach me how to be an astronomer. That's what we want to do for Kara now.
We need to understand more details about our star. We need to understand, are there 2 stars or are there 3? We need to know how the 2 stars are moving. For that, you need spectroscopy.
I've always found spectroscopic observations to be really interesting and exciting. All these tiny variations in the length of the waves can tell us so much about these huge balls of gas millions of light years away.
So the question now will be, how do we process these data? While both Karen and Jason, my colleagues, have worked with spectroscopic data in the past, neither of them have actually dealt with exactly this question.
90% of science is figuring out what to do, and the other 10% is actually doing it.
If the data is good and we're good at analyzing it, hopefully we'll know if there is or isn't a third body.
If it's there, there's some reasonable chance we could already see it. If it's not there, I don't think we can 100% rule it out.
We maybe saw a blip that could be that, but it's so small it could be noise.
I'm only asking, is there a big star that's pushing it around and confusing me and making me say crazy things, right? Or is there not a big star?
I guess you never know in science if you'll get the answer you're expecting or something wholly unexpected. And that's the fun part of science. And the fun part of the universe is that there's just a lot we don't know yet.
At this point, everything hinges on that third body. If we find it, then that's the explanation for what Larry's seeing, and his expectation of an exploding star isn't going to happen. Just like great astronomers in the past, we're trying to figure out which model gives us the best explanation for what we're seeing.
By the end of the 16th century, when you have people like Brahe noticing things that were wrong in the sky, this sort of starts a chain reaction. His student, Kepler, notices that some other things don't match. And then there's this young Italian, Galileo Galilei, who doesn't invent the telescope, but gets really good at pointing it at the sky. So we've got moons going around Jupiter, and we've got spots on the sun, and we've got craters on the moon.
People who studied these things realized that if you wanted to get a coherent structure, you've got to move to a new kind of world.
What was so revolutionary about what they were doing was that they were making the heavens knowable in the same way that the Earth was knowable. So it was science of a new caliber. It was a science that said our intellectual abilities as humans can be applied to things beyond our control, like the heavenly bodies. And instead of being other, they became a part of the story of who we are.
What happens following Tycho Brahe and Galileo is eventually Isaac Newton.
It is Newton's view of God as infinite and indivisible that influences his understanding of the cosmos and of space and time and gravitation, and influences his perspective that this is a domain that we as intellectual creatures made in the image of God, that's open to us for investigation.
And that's part of the excitement of science, when you put together your data for the first time in a way that you can start to analyze something physical about what's going on in the universe. That's the preliminary look. We see two distinct bumps. Sometimes they blend together, but like right now, there's a bump on the right side, and as this little bump switches sides, that's telling us that there's a less massive star orbiting a more massive star. If there were a third star, my initial guess is it has to be pretty faint if it's there.
I think it's been a very productive evening, even though we're very tired. Her early numbers really match my expectations for a merging binary star that's all by itself without a third body. And we didn't really have that information until tonight. So I'm very excited that seems to be what we're seeing.
So if we flip to the back, we can see our actual data from Apache Point on the left and Wairo in Wyoming on the right. And so what we're looking
So
for
it's really been quite a rapid learning curve to say that in 4 weeks we really understand what we're looking at and can draw a conclusion. Where 4 weeks ago it was exciting to have brand new data in our hands, it's all the more satisfying now to say we know what the data are saying.
As we look at this chart, the first thing we have here is the period, which is getting faster and faster. So it's an important factor as we look at how soon it's going to merge with our predictions of 3 to 5 years. The key as far as figuring out whether or not there's a third body is whether or not we see that spike in green in any of our spectra.
And so if there were a third star there, we would see it in this spectrum, but there's nothing left here that looks like that, however small. Where a month ago, the third body model was really the more likely model for any reasonable interpretation. Yeah. We can now rule it out. We've tested the model, and therefore it's not there. And the unlikely model is what remains.
Scientists are supposed to be impartial and not want it to turn out one way or another way because then you're biased. But inside we're like, yeah, we know what we're doing. It's this way. I was hoping for this.
Thank you for celebrating Picnic Pops with the Grand Rapids Symphony.
can get tickets in here. I'll just wait right here.
Definitely, Larry thought about music as a career, but he, I think, had an interest in astronomy for a bit longer than his interest in music, and so astronomy won out.
Music speaks to something deep in the soul. It's one thing I like especially about the fireworks pops is that it starts an hour later than the other ones, and so that in the second half you begin to see the stars come out.
There's 100 billion stars in our galaxy. Millions upon millions of stars out there that in the next 5 years are going to do nothing whatsoever. We really shouldn't, by coincidence, have found the next star that is going to blow up.
We still don't know if we're right.
But at some point, you've got to go out on a limb here, make our prediction, so the larger community can know that we could see a nova from the get-go for the first time ever in history.
Yes. Nothing out of the ordinary that I saw.
So now we have our results. We're full steam ahead with our prediction. But before we can let the world know, Larry needs to write it up and present it to the astronomical community. So that's what we're waiting on right now.
And right now, we're just holding back, kind of waiting until Larry gets that paper out.
It's now August 10th. I want to be done by September 8th. And we have to subtract 1 week because I'm going to visit my mother on Wednesday. Which you got to do what you got to do.
Larry is extremely meticulous. He takes his time to be extremely careful.
I think he's feeling, in a real way, the tensions that scientists can feel in terms of their different commitments and responsibilities. He has a responsibility as a scientist to get things right, but he also has a responsibility to share with a broader community, so he's feeling that pull.
Yeah, hey guys, out of the way. All right, this is going in, so heads up.
Just as we reached the end of our summer research period, Kara shared with me that she's not going to come back this fall. But apparently with the changing value of the Canadian dollar in the past year, it's not clear to her she can afford to stay here. That's certainly a blow to our project. Having had her here for a year, she's learned a whole lot about binary stars. The real joy as a professor of working with students is to see them grow and to share with them the scientific project at a deeper level. In this case, I'm going to have to start from scratch again with a student that is just learning what's going on.
Not having her on the team is going to slow him down, and he already needs as much help as he can get to make progress at a rapid rate, so we're going to miss her.
Well, I made huge progress this summer. And then I ground to a halt for 4 months.
That paper still isn't out.
I've had to recalculate a few things as well, just to make sure it's really fully and properly done. The good news this month, January 2016, I have released time from the college to finish my paper. It's an incredibly busy semester, so intense that I haven't made any progress on my paper.
He's on Larry time. Larry's always on Larry time. And you just don't put a timeline on it. You just say it's just Larry time and he'll be done when he's done.
He's under a lot of pressure. He's got a lot of teaching responsibilities. He's a perfectionist when it comes to writing. So I understand it, but still, the clock is ticking, and we really would like to get this out there.
It's a joke in the physics department that it's taking him forever to write his paper. It's kind of like he's the captain of a ship having us do all these random jobs just to keep us busy until he's ready for it.
Well, it's now August 11th. I've spent my entire summer trying to finish the draft of my paper. So, scientific advice from my Chinese fortune cookie manufacturer. Time is precious, but truth is more precious than time. I've been a little slow getting my paper done. So this is my comment to my department chair to just be patient. We'll get this at the right time.
The engineering too, right?
This is what we're looking at here. This thing's going in today.
It is amazing how many details there are to dot all the I's, cross all the T's. And it says here, email the editorial office if you have a problem with this. So, in fact, I just emailed them a moment ago. And here is my email back, 11:31, from the office manager saying, I have finished the process for you. She hit the submit button.
She stole our thunder.
Here is my acknowledgement. It has been received. I have a manuscript.
And by the way, the star has already exploded.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to our Friday morning briefing here at the 229th meeting of the American Astronomical Society. So in case this is your first press conference at the AAS, I'm going to introduce the topic and the speakers, and then we'll start on the left, go to the right.
In my presentation today, I have two of the elements that to me make science exciting. A very specific prediction that can be tested, and a big explosion.
In 2022, we might be able to witness an explosive creation of a new star.
And in that, Professor Larry Molnar, he tells us the story, Professor.
That prediction has launched Larry into the international spotlight of science news.
KIC 9 Det är stjärnbilden Svanen som vi om några år.
The National Geographic, Washington Post, The Telegraph, Russia Today.
La Boom Star. A German outlet quoting a French outlet quoting this English term.
I have to say, I'm not surprised at all. I saw this coming years ago at that seminar when you first announced it. I said, yes. This is going to be huge. This will be world news.
So yesterday evening, I walked my dog around the block, as I do twice a day, all the time. And 3/4 way around the block, a man came out down his driveway, who I've never spoken to before, and said, "Are you Larry?" And
where it gets around.
Told me really cool coverage. So I am literally being stopped on the street there. Good morning.
Good morning. Come on in. Are you here for an interview?
Yes, I'm Larry Molnar.
Okay.
Okay.
Follow me.
Well, I think I get nervous to begin with, yes.
Because they looked at that nonsense that was released by maybe the intelligence agencies. Who knows? But maybe the intelligence agencies, which would be a tremendous blow.
Just a little focus on something else here. Hello? Yes, this is Larry.
Now, you've been quite vague about when this happens. How much more information do you think you can get as we get closer to this?
Now, if you look through the records, there's been predictions in the media of binary stars merging in the next 100,000 years, or in the next million years. I would call those vague. I'm saying in the next 5 years, give or take one, so it's really a little unnerving to be that specific.
Larry's been getting some pushback from the astronomical community about whether his hypothesis is plausible at all. One guy who really doubts it is this guy, Thailand, who's done work in this area.
Larry Molnars djärva förutsägelse bygger på en upptäckt av astronomen Romuald Thailand vid Nicolaus Copernicus astronomiska center i den polska staden Torun. Han tror inte att Larry Molnars teori håller.
The main reason for which I am rather skeptical of their conclusion that this system is going to merge in a few years is that it was found in a very small sample of stars. There is a Polish proverb, searching for a needle in a haystack.
To understand why Thailand's opinion matters so much, you have to go back to Larry's work with what he calls his Rosetta Stone, the star V1309 SCO.
V1309 SCO was a star that exploded back in 2008. Nobody saw it happen, but Thailand was able to go back and use some archival data to get a glimpse of how it happened.
Thailand was able to show that V1309 SCO was a binary star that went through this death spiral. And it's on the basis of Thailand's pattern that Larry's saying, oh, this kick star is going to go through the same motions, the same death spiral, and eventually explode.
Another person that made a comment about our work was Andrei Pecha, a Czech astronomer, who was studying the actual explosion of V1309 SCO, trying to model what was going on there. He's able to make some headway in understanding the explosion that occurred in 2008. However, Pecha decided that it won't work for our star.
Yeah, I admit that I'm actually skeptical that the two stars will merge. I still think that there are other explanations for what is observed that are potentially more likely.
But if they are lucky?
They're lucky, but it would be extraordinarily lucky. Luck, extraordinary, incredible luck.
Well, yes, I could be wrong. We'll see that very soon, and if I'm wrong, I'm going to be very publicly wrong.
So the stakes are getting higher here, but he's no stranger to taking risks, that's for sure. Larry's a person who will act out of principle and take risks if he thinks they're justified.
I still remember the shooting. It was November 1st, so the day after Halloween. There was nothing that could be done about the shooting. The motivation and whatnot was so unrelated to anything anyone could guess. Where with the flooding in '93, it seemed quite clear that there was something that I in particular could do that others either weren't equipped or weren't interested in doing.
Now, Iowa has seen its share of flooding over the years, but nothing of the magnitude of the flood of '93. Water everywhere, and that water spread higher and farther than in any past flooding.
The flooding in Iowa was a really big piece of our history.
That affected my neighborhood. So the effect to me was actually to ask the question that summer, how was the dam managed and were we doing the best we could?
And Larry, in his usual very comprehensive way, very careful way, looked at this issue of flooding and the dam.
It certainly illustrates the way I think about science, which is we have models, models make predictions, and we test those predictions. In 1993, they said that that flood was a 500-year flood. It would never happen again. It seemed quite clear to us that it would happen in the next 10 to 15 years. That led us to work very hard to try and get them to change those plans, knowing that it would happen again and hoping that they would do better the next time.
Well, astronomers don't necessarily have that on their job description, that they're helping people in the local community.
Along the way, his faculty chair approached him and said, Larry, I think you maybe need to refocus on your own work and not mess around with this stuff here.
He spent a lot of his personal time on the issue of flooding.
The time lost to working on these other issues
had a serious negative impact in his career, because in the end he did not receive tenure.
Not getting tenure ends your life at that university. You have to leave. You're told you're not good enough. The irony in this case is that Larry was right about the flood, and if they'd listened to him, they could have saved themselves a lot of damage.
2008 was even more devastating than 1993. People lost their homes in a broader area than in 1993.
Larry's neighborhood, when he lived there, had approximately 135 homes. There are only about 65 left.
So this is where our house used to be.
It's hard to recognize even. I mean, I see the corner, so I know it must be here.
Yeah, yeah. So, because Larsons were there, but there's so many trees here,
Yeah.
as though it had not been here.
Never any house, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the house was right here.
Wow.
Yeah, the house was right here.
Larry's the kind of person who's going to do what he feels called to do, even if it means sacrifice on his part. He wasn't setting himself up for success according to how academics work and how research works.
He will chase the unusual thing, and I think that in part accounts for what is happening right now.
Serendipity, they often say, it comes to the prepared mind, right? We were open to this and willing to follow it up. It's because of our focus on the undergraduate students and our willingness to try something unlikely and our perseverance to try it for 4 years that we can come to this point. In a sense, it's serendipity, but in a sense, this is exactly the kind of place where that can happen.
Okay. There we go. We have more selections of pop.
Over this past summer, we analyzed some of the data since September, and we have added some new dots to our plot, which, as you can see, those little red dots follow almost perfectly our line that we had plotted from our paper in September.
So there's a real tension here because Larry's getting this pushback about what his predictions are, but he keeps taking the data and it's all lining up just like he says it's going to happen.
So question one, are we still on track? Yes. Right? Because it was very publicly put out there.
I think it takes a good deal of courage to step out there in front of other scientists who are going to do everything to essentially shoot it full of holes and to still go forward.
Ideally, you want as risky a prediction as possible because that will teach you the most about the thing you're trying to study. In practice, it's very hard to be a professional scientist and make high-risk predictions. Most predictions fail. So if you make a really risky prediction that then fails, you lose everything.
I feel a lot of pressure right now. Just the fact that there are these couple other groups that have said this doesn't work, I want to get word out there that that's not correct.
So one of the issues is that his prediction seems to be based on just dumb luck. He doesn't have a theory for why the star would be doing this. If he had a theory, it would help to build the case and to understand what's going to happen next.
I've learned tons about quote-unquote real science, what it's like to be on the front line in terms of this is an abstract thing that we don't understand and we're right up against it. Like we're actively exploring avenues and finding things that work and don't work.
I don't understand.
Yes. I don't either.
I mean...
So you may theoretically have a disagreement because you as humans just don't know the answer. The star does know the answer and the star will tell us.
My brain hurts.
Well, because it's been so hard. Nobody's been able to get a decent structure, the interior of the contact binary. And they've been trying this since the 1970s.
Like it or not, Larry's prediction is based on an analogy, and that's pretty unsatisfying from a scientific point of view. He thinks that his star looks like another star that happened to behave in some interesting way. But usually you don't want to just point to a pattern, you want an underlying explanation for it.
One of the interesting things about the history of astronomy is that you can just talk about observations of things you see in the sky, and you can come up with good mathematical predictions based on totally incorrect knowledge. So for instance, you can predict where the planets are going to be in the sky, assuming that the Earth is the center of the universe, and that works perfectly well. But to get to sort of a mature science, you also want to be able to answer why questions. Why do the planets move in these particular patterns?
Newton gave us a universal law of gravitation and said, look, it's not just that we can use our intellectual capabilities to understand and evaluate the heavens, but they're all governed by the same few laws. And that was really a change of worldview.
For the first time, you began to look at the heavens physically rather than geometrically.
Newton's vision of inert matter pulled on by the force of universal gravity described by mathematical laws explains in a satisfying way all the things that were known up to that point. So then the question becomes, could it be extended to new things? Can Newton's cosmology help us understand something we have not yet seen? Then your predictions have some sort of metaphysical meat behind them. We're moving from just being able to predict where something is going to be on the sky based on observation to tying those predictions into a larger cosmology. It's not just that it's going to be where we think it's going to be, but we know how the universe works such that that prediction is going to come true.
In the past 6 months, my understanding of how contact binaries work has matured greatly. And the key to that has been one new discovery.
So we go through. Then we also have to address what other people have said skeptical of us.
Right. The discovery in a massive data set that was studied by a Polish astronomer.
They have a table of 104 objects that we want to talk about.
He looked at 1 million stars to find close binaries, and he found 20,000 close binaries. And then he looked at those 20,000, and he found 100, which were changing their orbits. I took those and plotted them in a way he didn't plot, and was able to throw away 90% of them and find just 7 that are left. They're doing something new.
By analyzing data that was supposed to be refuting his predictions, he was actually able to identify a lead on more stars that could possibly explode in the future.
So we don't know what's going to happen with the kickstar, but the addition of these 7 stars gives Larry a basis for building a theory and understanding how to look for this kind of star.
The Ogle targets are really exciting because maybe they're emerging stars very much like V1309 SCO, maybe even more like V1309 SCO than our star is, but they're really faint. And they're in a really crowded part of the sky, and especially they're in the southern hemisphere.
We can't do much more without follow-up data on those systems. The problem is they're all fairly dim and fairly southern, and so we have collaborators elsewhere who are going to help us with that.
My name is Maja Vučković. I'm a professor at the University of Valparaiso, which is not in the United States, it's in Chile. When I met Larry a year ago on a workshop, he started to explain to me about this group of stars, and so then I was like, well, so we should just follow these stars. These stars happen to be in the southern hemisphere, so not reachable from the north.
Probably next summer, a trip to Chile would be involved to take some data and really know what's going on with those stars.
This is a really exciting time for Larry's project. The observations are continuing to confirm his prediction. He's got a growing number of collaborators. The other thing that's interesting is that I think we're entering this sort of a golden age of observational astronomy for the public. We had the solar eclipse, which much of the nation saw, and really captured the popular imagination for what things are doing in the sky. Larry's discovery, if the star goes into the red nova phase in 2022, it'll be right in the middle of that golden age.
So I have not always known that I wanted to be an astronomer. I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, necessarily. So I didn't really have a chance to go to college right after high school. I actually joined the Marine Corps. And it was actually while I was in Afghanistan that I saw the lunar eclipse when I was out there in 2011. And then I saw the lunar eclipse again 6 months later. And something kind of clicked in my head of, yeah, this is something worth pursuing. This is something I want to do. I first heard about Larry's prediction shortly after his paper had come out. Dr. Welsh, my advisor, brought it up to me. And he asked if, hey, is this something you'd want to work on? And I said, yeah, you know, it's something that would help me. Should be a quick project, one summer, done.
Because it was such an interesting project, that lured us in and said, let's see if we can make it a little bit better. We can grab this data that Larry didn't have access to and see if it helps.
We could get a better idea of when they were going to merge and outburst, then we would know when to point our telescopes up there and look for this explosion. So we were pretty excited for this to happen.
But much to our surprise, when we got the Vulcan data, it didn't fit, it didn't work.
Hey, I hear you have a game changer.
We do.
So, do you think it's real? I mean, do you think this one is right?
The question here is about our very first data point here at the left. They don't place it there, they place it an hour later. How do they get something an hour different from what we get?
Yeah, it's a huge difference. I mean, and it's pretty obvious that your model depends pretty heavily on the positioning of that point.
That's right. And they agree with every other point. So it all comes down to that one. Question is their offset the right one, or is our offset the right one?
As an undergraduate, someone who hadn't even officially moved into the graduate program yet, disagreeing with a professional astronomer who had been doing this work for years, I doubted myself a lot. Are we doing something wrong? Did we make a mistake or a typo somewhere along the way? We double and triple checked our data. Everything that I have learned about how to collect data, the physics of the stars, trust in that, to not just trust someone else's prediction that I'm the wrong one, but to trust the science. And we were certain that we had this right.
Turns out the time we used would have the star below the horizon. So whatever is the cause of it all, it's clear that our number cannot be right.
The problem here is that Larry and Dan were using a mix of their own data with other data. And when they put that all together, they thought that a certain model would work. But it turns out that the old data was mistaken. The model Larry was using can't fit all of the data.
Okay.
So it seems pretty clear that you're going to want to have a go-to statement to refer people to when people ask.
Absolutely. And that'll, yeah,
And
to think that through a little bit.
You can be as careful as you want, but implicit in every scientific prediction is the conditional statement, assuming our data are reliable.
Right.
Right? It's always there as a qualifier.
Yeah.
That point, for whatever reason, whoever's fault it might be, that point turned out not to be reliable, which undid the whole prediction.
Bottom line is, therefore, the time we used can't be the correct time. The half day off has to be the correct time. The premise for what's unique about this star is gone. The prediction made by this data point just has randomly followed what we predicted for the last 5 years, but for no good reason other than to lead us astray.
What's really frustrating is that it's something that really we couldn't even control.
It's such an unlikely source of error. We had no reason to think that that number could have been wrong.
We're going to the annual meeting of the Michigan Space Grant Consortium, where we'll be presenting our final word on our Kickstarter. And I guess it'll be the first public venue to hear us speak on the end of that, but also exciting new prospects for the future.
So, since the basis of our model has changed, our prediction is no longer founded. While it's disappointing that there won't be a major explosion in the next few years, we have a second story that we're very excited about.
Yeah, so now we're going to begin the new story. During our research, we studied the Ogle survey of about 1 million stars, and we found 7 out of 1 million in this survey with a rare long period and a large negative period derivative. And so our question was...
It was important to me that we get a really good, clear message this morning as we're sort of wrapping up that stage of it's not the Kickstarter that's going to blow up, but that we had a second story where we really feel we are understanding the whole process now.
Surveys, and maybe we might even find the next stage 3 object.
You know, we all had hopes for a great demonstration of the predictive power of physical science. So I was deflated in the sense of the excitement of the expectation. It was in my calendar. You know, watch out for the press release, watch out for the observation. And yet, this is a terrific example of how science works and how science is supposed to work.
I'm glad to answer that, and I think your readers will be interested to know what's the update, since they're wondering what's happening. This is how science is supposed to work, that it is self-correcting. If there's an error, we will find it and know when we're wrong.
It's a disappointment, but the way that it has been discussed and handled and processed has been a huge testament to what science should be, in terms of it's motivated by a genuine desire to understand the universe and how it works.
And that's one thing that inspires me about Molnar. It's about finding the truth.
Yeah.
And he always tells us that, and so I think that's really cool.
So Larry's prediction didn't pan out, but what he learned along the way might actually be bigger, because the theory could lead him to lots of those kinds of stars, and he's just starting to look at these first 7.
This week,
We will be observing the targets that my colleague Larry found. In the case that Larry is right, we will confirm that these stars are definitely getting closer together and that maybe eventually they will hug each other.
So, 7 targets that we're looking at. In the most crowded part of the Milky Way, this part here in Sagittarius, which is the direction towards the center of our galaxies. A place that we can see well if you're in the southern hemisphere, straight overhead. Though I was not in Chile, I did lose quite a lot of sleep over these last 9 nights. And I've seen enough of the data to know they are capable of answering our question.
The 7 stars, it turns out, are tracking just as Larry predicts. So he has 7 live candidates to go on and keep searching.
You fall off the bike, you got to get back on the bike. I want to make clear to people that I am moving on and that I'm moving on making progress on merging stars.
He was showing me his latest research, and I was actually quite impressed and interested in what he has done recently.
The new direction is pretty exciting. Larry has determined the ways in which we might look for stars, which will be merging in the near future.
He was able to map out how the whole population of these binaries evolve in a relatively simple and uncomplicated way. Now he's got a group of about 7 stars, and actually in the future more objects like this can be identified.
I can see a path forward. I can see how to scale this up. It's probably going to take 10 years to actually achieve, but at that point we should be back where we were 2 years ago with the candidate that's going to merge, except we'll know that it is indeed going to merge. So what is the nature of science? Anybody tell me, how does science work? It's a mystery. Yeah, it is in many ways. What I like about science is it's a place where you can ask cool questions, right? There's this amazing universe around us, and we get to say, how does it work like that?
A failure in science is a failure to relinquish an idea in the face of facts that contradict it. Science succeeds by getting closer and closer to the truth of what's actually happening in the real world.
There's a necessary epistemic humility, a humility about what we can know and the limitations of human knowledge and human investigation.
But our desire to wonder, how do things work and what does this tell us about who we are and what our place in the universe is, this is what people do.
I think other people are catching on that I'm making progress. Not yet. But in a sense, that's part of the excitement as well. In the next decade, I should have the prediction of the next one that will blow up. It may not be as near, may not be as exciting, but to actually eventually get back to, can I predict the next one that will blow up, that is my long-term goal still. Harder to get there, but more sure.